We're going to pick up here again in Proverbs 16, and there's a verse 18. It says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before stumbling." Here's something that we can use to monitor our lives. I do that with a lot of the scriptures here. I use them not to necessarily look at other people, but to look at how I can use that to adjust my own life. Am I becoming proud? Well, it says here, pride goes before destruction. So it would be good for me to begin to monitor my behavior and come to a place of humility. 16:24, another simple one. And once again, what we've got is each proverb, almost always or oftentimes a proverb can just stand by itself. So this isn't just a theme through the chapter 16. There's individual proverbs. Some of them, it runs along the line, but here it goes back to the words of our mouth. It says, "Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones." Here, if you want to bring healing to people, if you want to bring healing into yourself, really, it says pleasant words will do that. It says in verse 32 in chapter 16, "He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city." So once again, there's given a lot of credibility to what we do with our own spirit, how we adjust, how we control what's going on inside of us and what we present to others. When we move on to chapter 17, it says in verse 22, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bone." Once again, corresponding with verse 24 out of chapter 16, something that we do, there it talks about pleasant words, here it talks about a joyful heart, actually brings healing. It's a medicine. Said a broken spirit dries up the bones. And we can see people that seem to be so weak, just physically but emotionally, when their spirit is really broken, when they've just really been crushed. But we see that a joyful heart provides medicine even in that situation. Verse 27 of chapter 17, it says, "He who restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is counted prudent." So if you don't want to be seen as a fool, you can just be quiet and nobody will know whether you are or not. It says here, if we keep our mouth shut, somebody might think we're wise, and so you don't want to open your mouth and blow your cover. Here, if you restrain your words, you're told, and if you have a cool spirit, it says you're a person of understanding. And I think that's evident. We can see that in people around us as we look at their lives, and we can see that people that sit back, you like the person that just sits and listens, and they carefully examine, and then maybe they say a few things, rather than the one that just begins to spout off everything he knows. And we see that that's the way the Proverbs talk about it. It says a fool just kind of spouts off things. And a fool or a scoffer, if you try to instruct them, what you get is you get reproach in return. You ever run into somebody that you try and say something to them, and all you get is you walk away from that place bruised and beaten verbally because they just weren't going to take it. They weren't going to have anything. They weren't going to hear anything. While it says a wise person will hear instruction and they're going to do something with it. They're going to take it. Even if they're not sure what you're saying is true, they'll take it, examine it, and look at it. And that's kind of the theme as we go through Proverbs, as we look at that. So many of the scriptures talk about things like that. And you can find life verses out of here, things that can guide your life. And they also, what they do is they help you examine everything that you see in life. And you can come back and take a proverb and apply it to that situation. Here's one. Proverbs 18, verse 1. "He who separates himself seeks his own desire. He quarrels against all sound wisdom. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind." Another kind of thing, a fool is just the person that just starts dumping everything they know. Well, the Bible calls them a fool. And what we want to look out for, if you want to use a measure, and I've used this in my own life, in chapter 18, verse 1, "He who separates himself seeks his own desire." If you find yourself just isolating, you don't want anyone else to tell you anything about this situation. I guess you find it a lot in boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. They don't want to hear you talk about anything about that person because they're going to do what they're going to do. Well, the person who separates himself seeks his own desire. And it says he quarrels against all sound judgment. If you're trying to isolate, you should be aware that you're probably just trying to guard something, maybe something you already know deep down might not quite be right. It might even be wrong. But you separate yourself because you don't want anyone invading your opinion on this thing. And so you separate yourself, and you can do whatever you want when you do that. And so I'd say use this as a life verse. And then also about a fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind. I think a lot of us get caught up into foolish things. You probably find yourself in a conversation, at least I have. Maybe you're not like me. Probably you're not. But I think a lot of us get in situations where rather than even listening to what the other person's saying, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next. We don't even hear what they say, and we're already dumping stuff out. And here it says, a fool is not, they don't delight in understanding. They're not looking to really learn anything. They're just going to reveal whatever they got, whatever's in your mind. So I try and use that in my own life. If I'm doing that, and say, Ed, I don't try not to say it out loud, but Ed, you're acting a little foolish now. You probably ought to control that and listen to what the other person's trying to say. This one's a good one. I think a lot of us have embarrassed us here with this kind of logic. In verse 13, chapter 18, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. Have you ever someone starts to ask you something and you blurt out an answer, but it wasn't even the question they were asking? Well, I think a lot of us have had that happen to us, where we think we know what somebody's going to say and we send an answer out to them. Well, it turns out exactly what it says here. It's a folly and a shame to you. And so I've got to watch myself. I've done it plenty of times. And then here is a verse that I think everyone really needs to take to heart. If you don't take any of these other proverbs in this area to heart, this is one that you should really grab hold of. When you're listening to people talk about their life situations, it says in verse 17, chapter 18, the first to plead his case seems just until another comes and examines him. And what we find here is that, I don't know how many times, and I keep thinking, this is different this time, but it's not different. Somebody comes and they talk about their situation, and you get done listening to them, and you're thinking, man, maybe it's a husband-wife thing, and you think, man, that husband's really a jerk, and they didn't do this and that. You hear all that story, and then you hear the other side of the story and think, I didn't hear everything the first time. They're always, the first one to come to plead their case always seems just until you get the other side of the picture. And it happens over and over and over and over again. I tell you what, there's been a lot of times I thought, well, probably in this case it's not going to really be like that, but it really is like that. And so I would say, before you just go out, you hear something, you just go out, you start telling everybody what you heard. You need to get the other side of the story before you do that. It'd be good you do that in the news of today and what's going on. If you're just getting one news source, it's good for you to hear the other side. Let me give you a practical example that I just heard not too recently. This one might not apply by the time you hear this. Maybe all of this will be old news, but there was a study done on the effectiveness of ivermectin against COVID-19. And it was a peer-reviewed study done and showed that ivermectin is not effective for COVID-19. And then you'd look at the other side, and the other side of that was, okay, well, that study was done on late cases of COVID where people were already in serious condition, and ivermectin was applied all by itself, when in fact ivermectin was recommended to be applied early on in the COVID cycle and with other vitamins and minerals, et cetera, et cetera. So the other case says ivermectin is effective against COVID. So one says, here we have a peer-reviewed study, ivermectin is not effective, ivermectin is effective. So that's why the first to plead his case sounds just until he's examined. And not only in cases like situations like that, but everyday situations. And really, when you hear somebody plead their case, don't go out and just start repeating that. Don't go out and tell what they just told you until you hear, especially if it's something that could bring controversy, could bring division, could bring strife. Maybe it's a comment about somebody's lifestyle or what they're doing or how they lived or what they did. You need to hear the other side, because the first one to talk about it always seems like that's right until you hear the other side. And it's amazing how many details were not included on the other side when the first person told their story.